For something that's had such a gigantic impact, the Crossguard is one of the most overlooked and least understood systems in all of combat sports. Archie Moore used it to topple over 130 men, Buakaw used it to conquer K1, and heavyweight great Smokin' Joe Frazier used it to help floor Ali. The Crossguard is one of the most overlooked and least understood systems in all of combat sports. Although it's having a slight resurgence, it's not new. Far from it. The Crossguard has been in the pugilist toolkit since at least the 1800s, and presumably much, much longer than that. Unlike some other skill sets, it's not body type dependent. Big men like George Foreman used it to walk through fire en route to knockouts, and smaller men like Cowie and Frazier leveraged the Crossguard to block with their elbows, mitigating potential damage. All kinds of fighters can enjoy the benefit of completely following through with their punches, because they can just let the punch flow into a cross position instead of the usual retraction back to a normal guard. Archie Moore didn't need to get back into position to use blocks or parries. He was already in position to block as soon as his punch moved past his target. But naturally this begs the question, doesn't this make it much, much harder to punch? After all, your fist is all the way back on the other side of your body. How did some of history's most aggressive fighters use this bizarre system so well? And not just boxers, but Muay Thai fighters and mixed martial artists. The answer, of course, is that if you know how to use it, how to set up punches, then it's just as great for offense as defense. The only caveat is that it requires some special angles and setups. So let's take a look at one of the most hyper-defensive / hyper-aggressive systems of all time. To understand the benefits of the Crossguard, you need to understand how it differs from a more standard approach, like a standard guard or high guard where the arms are vertical. Unlike those guards, the Crossguard system completely protects one section of your body on both sides, meaning a cross block will make you entirely safe on your right side and your left side, with the nuance coming in how high or low you raise your arm. So with your chin tucked, one arm can protect most of your head, and two arms can protect the entire thing. The elbow and shoulder raised to protect one side, while your glove and opposite shoulder shields the other side. The same holds true for protecting your body, but of course it can't offer near the same protection here since the torso presents larger targets than the head. So you'd need to have Arnold Schwarzenegger arms to cover the entire thing. Using two cross-armed blocks at once can offer decent protection to the entire head and torso, which works great if you have long arms and are trying to withstand a sudden flurry or onslaught of punches before answering right back. This is the least nuanced way to use the system, but it can be effective, especially if your opponent doesn't use long combinations. However, good fighters can target the openings usually left by the rear arm. George Foreman used the Crossguard on his way to retake the heavyweight title 20 years later. Knowing the ins and outs of the system, when he came up against an opponent using a Crossguard himself, he targeted the opening left by his rear arm to score a knockdown. More adept Crossguard practitioners can generally deal with this opening by keeping their hand where it is and changing the level of the elbow. It can be used as a bump, coming up underneath the shot, or a parry, using the forearm or elbow rather than the glove. Some fighters will use the traditional catch or parry, but turn it into a cross block at the tail end, ensuring they're covered in all possible instances. Uppercuts can be another threat to the Crossguard if the arms are loose. However, if kept tied around the neck like a scarf, then the Crossguard can act as a one- or two-armed shield against upward strikes. So while certain strikes like the uppercut are a cause for concern, they aren't the Achilles heel you may imagine, so long as the Crossguard is reactive, dealing with each punch, rather than static. Rather than trying to shield your entire torso, you can do the exact opposite, using both arms to overprotect one specific section. You're effectively fusing every part of the Crossguard, shoulders, elbows, forearms, and gloves, into a single stabilized shield, ensuring you're able to absorb enormous impacts. Once again, this completely protects both sides, but will leave either your upper or lower sections completely vulnerable. Compare this to reinforcing a more regular guard, where you can reinforce either the right side or the left side, but one of them is going to be open. So in instances where opponents can sidestep and attack you from long range, supplementing with a crossguard might be the perfect idea. In fact, the reinforced crossguard can allow smaller fighters to absorb a ton of stopping power, so long as they're mindful of the massive openings it leaves. This was even more effective back in the days when boxing gloves were smaller and less padded, and this is why the crossguard might be a great idea for small glove Muay Thai and MMA. So it seems like as good a time as ever to bring up kicks. Can the crossguard be used against kicks? Well, yeah. If you think about it, you're already halfway to sweeping a kick away with a parry, while the other arm reinforces as a block. This is the most common tactic anyways. Or you have a fighter like Buakaw who likes to use a long guard / cross guard hybrid, often called the Dracula guard. Or, if you like being reminded of terrible fads, the dab. The legendary sky-piercing knee Dieselnoi used the Dracula guard all the time to protect his head against punches, while the other arm framed or established a clinch. With this system, the lead arm can grapple, navigating between cross blocks, cover blocks, and parries, depending on the situation. In MMA, we have Daniel Cormier, one of the greatest fighters to ever live, using the Dracula guard in conjunction with the crouch. This system helped him set up takedowns, clinches, and strikes. Crossblocks are becoming more and more common in MMA, along with the Philly shell. But given how MMA is still evolving, I imagine we won't see the full potential or the full flaws of these tactics for many years to come. So now we understand the ins and outs of exactly how the system works. Let's take a look at who can use it and what it's best used for. Basically, what are the best strategies behind the crossguard? To start with, the crossguard can be an excellent choice against outboxers. There's a major benefit against jab and movers, like Muhammad Ali or Sugar Ray Robinson. Both of them were beaten by fighters using the crossguard. The crossguard can nullify the jab to the head, regardless of what crazy angle you're taking. And that's a big part of why Ali had such difficulty against Frazier and Norton. The system is a nightmare for jab specialists who throw from all angles and target both eyes. Their entire game plan, expertly crafted as it may be, is mitigated. Once again, a popular option is to cross a parry over the center line into a cross block, halting the progress of not just the jab, but any follow-up strikes to the head. Sugar Ray Robinson fell victim to the exact same scenario against Gene Fullmer. What's fascinating and illustrative of how versatile the guard can be is that Fullmer used a reverse crossguard, placing his lead arm on top to block with his forearm and elbow. Fullmer didn't use the guard all the time, but he did use it at the right times, masterfully pressing into range to load up more powerful shots. And if you think this bizarre guard angle stopped him from jabbing, you'd be wrong. He had a weird, swatting, but oddly effective jab. And since he was blocking with the lead arm rather than his right hand, he was free to lob explosive shots with his power side, a number of which stung Robinson over the course of 15 rounds. If the opponent is looking to fire off long-range weapons like jabs, crosses, and hooks, then this can protect against all of them with little effort. The system requires more nuance and variability at mid-range due to the threat of body punches. But if your foe is a headhunter like Ali, then leaning slightly forward can move your body out of reach while the crossguard protects the head. The benefits go well beyond overprotecting one block of your body on all sides. But once again, don't forget there are vulnerabilities to every strategy. Remember how Holyfield found holes in Foreman's guard with high volume, multi-leveled offense. It's impossible for both arms to cover every opening. So Holyfield's long, volume-oriented punches found defensive lapses in Foreman's armor. Since it takes more time to set up punches because your arms are crossed, high volume can be doubly effective as you beat your opponent to the punch repeatedly. The same scenario played out in my favorite fight of all time, Rocky Marciano versus Archie Moore. Moore could not cope with Rocky's volume. Although he set up some tremendous, skillful counters, he was already a much older fighter, and he simply couldn't plug all the leaks in his guard at the rate that Marciano kept throwing. Instances like these are why the guard needs some extra help to reach his full potential, and these tactics are directly related to offense. There are two main strategies for setting up offense from the crossguard. The first is to tank a shot, then give a harder one back. Foreman would march into mid-range, then turn his cross block into a cross frame to move his target and set up shots. A trick he shared with Dieselnoy. We've already seen how Fulmer used it to rush into brawling exchanges. Buakaw had yet another tactic, shielding with the cross block while the other arm kept distance. Regardless which tactic you favor, the premise is clear. The second offensive strategy for using the crossguard is more dynamic and, frankly, far more impressive. One that Archie Moore loved to employ far more than his pupil Foreman. A different strategy entirely that works for a different kind of fighter. This would be to partner the crossguard with dynamic head movement, often incorporating elements of the Philly shell and high guard. Some other fighters who use this system include Frazier, Evander Holyfield, and Muhammad Qawi. The reason it's so effective is that the folded arms can protect most of the body, while head movement protects, well, the head. So you get a clear line of sight, plus dynamic angles off the center line from low line head movement. Being able to crouch safely like this can set up some very powerful shots, ripe for knockouts. Here are just a few examples. Here Frazier dips left, protecting himself with the cross block before weaving out to connect with the rattling gazelle hook. Next we have Fulmer, showcasing his reverse crossguard. He used the exact opposite tactic as Frazier. He would raise his lead elbow and dip to the right, chambering his right side so he could explode forward with a tremendous overhand. And once more, here's the great Archie Moore. Moore would condition his opponents to beat on his highly resistant crossguard, standing square with tight arms, essentially making the opponent feel like they were striking a wall. But the next time they threw, Moore would turn and counter. The opponent was expecting a stout target. Instead, they would fall forward, maximizing the impact of Moore's right hand. So there's your brief synopsis on crossguards. The guard and crossblocks in general are a strange but powerful system. Deadly in the right hands. It's a system that necessitates intelligence. So if you're the crafty type, give it a try, and let me know what you think. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.